Again, I'm always interested when I find practically unanimous agreement about some topic and then find that this perspective is buttressed with falsehoods and misleading statements. If some aspect of history or science or ideology is true, then there should be no need to support it with lies. I think most rational people would agree with this. This, though, is what is happening with the ideology of anti racism. And although it is so glaringly obvious, nobody seems prepared to call it out and say what is going on. Worse still, it's being done to children in British schools, and yet even there, nobody wishes to point it out. I want to look at two important strands of the anti racist narrative this morning. One is that white people are somehow inherently prejudiced and have something called white privilege and have historically mistreated black people. And the other is the idea that there have been communities of black people in Britain since the time of the Romans. Here is a book which is in many schools and children's libraries in this country. If you have a child or grandchild at school, then the chances are that he or she will have been exposed to this book, which was published by Franklin Watts in 2021. We turn to page 10, which is about the transatlantic slave trade, and read: in the 18th century, millions of black Africans were captured by European slave traders. They were marched to the coast in chains, then shipped from Africa to the USA, West Indies, and Brazil. Well, that is a lie. It is designed to mislead children and reinforce the idea that black people were victims of the slave trade and that the whole business was the work of wicked white Europeans. The slave traders did not capture black people at all. They bought them from black African slave traders. Surely people have heard of the triangular trade, no? It was so called because British ships sailed from this country to West Africa loaded with manufactured goods, such as weapons, tools, pots, pans, mirrors, all sorts of other things which were not available in Africa. These goods were used by means of barter to buy slaves from black slave traders. There was no question at all of European slave traders capturing anybody, as is said in this book. It was a mercantile transaction between two lots of slave traders, one group black and the other white. This concept of black people as victims only of white people is reinforced here on page 24. See this sad scene? You can see here the poor black girl with a violin case is being excluded from a group of white children playing classical music. Why is she being treated in this way? Because there are far fewer opportunities for people of colour to be represented in areas such as classical music, fine art, or ballet. Why are there fewer opportunities? Are music teachers refusing to give lessons in piano or violin to black children or Asians? Are shops refusing to sell them violins or pianos? Are orchestras operating policies to keep them completely white? Or is this rather a matter of income and class? Are white working class children also less likely to be having violin lessons or being in an orchestra? I cannot leave this book without pointing out another lie found on page 16, by the way. Going off on a slight tangent. This is about the Empire Windrush, and we are told the advertisement, we're told here that, where are we? After the Second World War, Britain didn't have enough people to work in hospitals, on buses or trains. Many Windrush passengers had answered an advert to come and work in Britain. This is a lie. The advertisement, which appeared in the Jamaican Daily Gleaner on April 15th, 1948, simply said passenger opportunity to the United Kingdom and offered fares between 28 and £48. That's it. The idea that there was an invitation to come and work in Britain is false. None of those on the Windrush had answered an advertisement to come and work here. So much for the falsehoods aimed at our children and grandchildren. I have here a popular book about racism written by Adam Rutherford, How to Argue with a Racist. It was hugely popular, published in 2020. Rutherford wants people to believe that there have been black communities in Britain for thousands of years. And so he says things, he runs through some very scanty evidence, names on tombstones in Britain, which suggests that people might have come from Syria or North Africa. He then goes on to say, in 2007, a small cluster of white Yorkshiremen with no known connections to Africa were shown to bear Y chromosomes that are most commonly found in countries such as Guinea-Bissau, and this gene flow may have occurred in Roman Britain, page 38. The author here is gambling on nobody checking the source for this claim and feels confident that he can mention the Romans and that this will reinforce the idea of those communities of black people in this country that far back. Of course, it's nonsense. For one thing, there's not a shred of evidence that any black person lived in Britain at that time. Secondly, of course, if there were black people in the Roman army, then they wouldn't have been from West Africa. They would rather have come up through Egypt along the Nile from what is today's Sudan. That's 2,500 miles from West Africa, by the way. The fact that this is a chromosome from West Africa at once suggests the transatlantic slave trade, which focused on that area. Sure enough, when we read the report in Nature and so on, and I give links in the description to this video, it turns out that all this relates to a single black person who was probably living in England in the 18th century. Most likely he was a black servant or slave because we know there were a few about at that time in England. This then is the way in which the anti-racism dogma is advanced. It can only be supported by lies and deception. That doesn't mean, of course, that the central tenets of anti-racism are necessarily themselves false, but it does make us ask why lies are needed if this is a sound doctrine. Why not simply tell the truth? I give links to the two books about which I've been talking in the description to this video.